At the time of this recording, it is the day after Father's Day. And for those of you who know me well, know that I have my first baby on the way. And my guest today has written a book called When at Home First. So you might be listening in to a one-on-one counseling session here because I need to learn some of this stuff. So, Cory Carlson, welcome to the show.
I love that intro, Hampton. I love your humility, even before we hit record and following up, even watching you here these past few months. It's pretty cool to be on this show. So thank you for making the time to talk with me, and looking forward to it.
Hey, well, I'm fired up about this, and I just want to dive right into who Cory Carlson is real quickly, guys. Cory he's not an old guy, but he's not in his 20s, you know. But I think I'm having him on just because I think a lot of what he may share today is things that, as you said, you wish someone would have told you, or someone did tell you and you just weren't listening. But I would love to just hear some of your story of kind of how you got to where you are today to kick us off.
Yes, sometimes I think I'm still in my 20s, especially when it comes to playing sports. And I have 3 kids. My youngest is 10 years old. And so I got to keep in shape to run routes with him and throw him the ball and, play soccer and all that's pretty darn fun. But yes, Hampton, a mentor told me wisdom is spelled Wisdumb. And so any wisdom I have is from dumb mistakes that I have made in my life. And when I saw you on LinkedIn, impressed with a clip I heard of you and talking with a guy named Pete Durand, who is a common connection you and I both have met and online and talked with. I want to reach out because you have this podcast. I'm like, man, I would love to be a guest and just share some of the things I've learned along the way that could be of help to somebody. And you mentioned the recording is the day after Father's Day. It's also my anniversary today. So today is 24 years of marriage, and I'm crazy grateful for it because marriage is hard. And I know you're in your early years of marriage, and even at 24 years, it doesn't get necessarily easier because there's days we're roommates, we give each other a cold shoulder, we kind of do all that dumb stuff, but we still power through it. And I think what I would like any listener to hear in this podcast, if they don't get anything else, is that, man, no matter where you're at, like, you don't have to stay there. Like, if you're in a relationship and you want your marriage to improve, with intentionality and with recalibration, you can make it better. If you feel you're wandering or lacking purpose, like, that's okay. You can find purpose and you can recalibrate. So wherever you're at, and that is okay. You just don't have to stay there. And so for me, that's I've got parts of that story throughout my whole career. I started out as a civil engineer by degree, and then became a civil engineer for a company. I did that for 4 years, and I did not find joy or fulfillment out of that job, which we could definitely unpack more. But I did that. Then I got involved in technical sales, where I sold civil engineering products like bridges and storm sewer, real sexy stuff. But then from there, I did have success in sales, in your typical sales trajectory. They said, hey, great job in sales. We're cutting your territory in half. We're putting another person over there and go do it again. Well, fortunately, I was able to do it again. I then got promoted, moved to Denver, Colorado, where I manage a bunch of people in states. And then I got promoted, moved to Cincinnati, which is where I live now. And at Cincinnati, I was vice president of a $120 million division. And Hampton, I was in over my head. I was managing people older than me. I leapfrogged my boss, and I was now managing him. And there's a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, I'm going to get busted. Somebody's going to knock on my door and say, hey, we way over promoted you. Get out. And there's been a few times in my life where I've taken my identity to work, and we can unpack that even more. But in this scenario, it was something similar where I had that imposter syndrome. If I presented to the executive team and it went well, I thought I was the man. But if it didn't go well, I was, obviously afraid I'd get canned or something would happen. And so it was just like, I was skipping the gym. I was skipping quiet time. I remember like my kids playing on the ground, and I would have my laptop on my lap. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. I do not want this type of life. And so I reached out to my boss, and he had said, hey, get an executive coach. I've always had one. And I was like, man, why didn't you tell me this sooner? But I got an executive coach, and it changed my life. I know that sounds extreme, but one, it just did. That's what I do now for a living. But also it just changed my life because I became a better father, husband, leader, because I was looking at life differently. Like, it wasn't just about how much money I made. Instead, it was more about serving other people. It was more about, I was put on this earth to do more things than just be a successful vice president. It was to be a father, a husband, a friend, a follower. For me, I know for you too, but for me, faith is strong. So it's a follower of Jesus. And so I looked at life differently. And I think for a lot of the listeners, it's take that big macro view early on. Like, it's not just about the career. And then, hey, once I get my career rocking and rolling, then I'll be a better husband or wife, or a better parent. Like, it's okay. Now I'll play with my kids later. I've got to work hard. I got to climb the corporate ladder. And that's a lie. That is an absolute lie. Our family wants our presence more than our provision. They want us hanging out with them. They want us going on dates with them. They want us throwing the football, playing the Legos, whatever that case may be. Not just, do they got the new shoes, they got the new backpack. And so, but it's a lie. We watch all of our social media feeds, and it's about how much money you make. And that does not bring joy.
I saw something the other day that said the only people that will ever remember you worked late are your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm hearing you say that.
That's awesome. And that's an awesome quote. It's super sad, but the only people that remember you work late are your kids. That's really good. I think in line with that working and come home, that's another thing I have to remind myself, but even talk to my clients, is the day does not end when we walk through that front door. Our day ends when our head hits the pillow at night. And there's a lot of leaders I know where they work super hard during the day, but then they walk through that front door and it's like, oh, whoo, I'm done. Let me just sit on the couch, have a beer, aimlessly scroll my phone or watch TV. It's like, the day's not over, man. You've got a spouse to serve. You've got kids to play with and love on. And then you got friends. And so the day doesn't end till the end. And so just like if you're filling up a gas tank to go somewhere, if you're about to run out of gas, you need to make that adjustment. Go get more gas. Same thing. It's like some people are like, well, I'm just so tired at 6. Well, make adjustments throughout the day. Go for a walk around the building. Turn off your cell phone. Just do whatever it takes so that you can manage your energy to make it to the end.
Absolutely. I've noticed that being a potential struggle for me, and I'm trying to be hyper aware of that right now. And I told my wife yesterday, it's like, I want to make sure in the last couple of months leading up to when our baby comes that I'm spending intentional time with you. I think my pastor said the other day that so many people, and not to stereotype, but oftentimes men that are just like killing it at work all day, super ambitious, show home and they really struggle to, quote, waste time with their kids. He's like, we need to learn to like waste time with our kids, with our spouse. And by waste, he just means just like being there. And I think for me, if you look at the books behind me, it's about like working hard and habits and efficiency and productivity, and all that stuff can be great. But I'm finding that doesn't work super well in relationships. Like a lot of times in relationships, you just need to be and not like manufacture a great relationship with someone. It just takes time. That's one thing I found in my relationship with God too. You can't just like check a box every day. God's like, hey buddy, I want all of you. Like, this isn't a quick 45-minute workout or ripping 50 cold calls. Like, I understand that works at work, but I've had a hard time kind of shifting hats when I get home. And that's definitely something that I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I love your pastor talking about wasting time, because for us overachievers and go-getters, it feels like wasting time. It just is like, oh my goodness, this 30 minutes, I could have done so much. I could have made a post on LinkedIn. I could have reached out to a whole bunch of people and, try to get on their podcast or try to get a speaking engagement. or whatever the case may be. But it's like, no, we are, here to do so much more. And my kids are older than yours, and it's pretty cool to see how intentionality of our parenting can start to show up later. And that's the hard part with parenting is we kind of, it's a delayed gratification. I mean, where we do the things now, talk to them about making their beds and say please and thank you. And we just pound that nail all the time while they're younger. And then as they start to get older, like we just had a friend over last night for dinner, and he was very complimentary how my 10-year-old and 15-year-old could look him in the eyes and have a conversation with them, and how they said please and thank you. And it just, he complimented me. I'm like, but it's hard. Like, we didn't give up. And I think, Hampton, a couple things is he made a comment like, hey, I can't believe your kids are sitting around hanging out talking. And the reality is, when they were younger, they didn't have an option. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't have an option. It's like, no, you're going to sit around. We have guests. We're going to talk. We're going to engage. We're going to sit, be polite. And now I don't even know if they think it's an option anymore. They just don't ask. Yeah. And so they sit around. The other thing is, it was not an option. They always had to go to their sibling sports.
Mm.
And what's so cool is, as they got older, they wanted to go to sibling sports because the sibling was going to show up to their sport.
Yeah.
And so some of these things we do early on in our parenting, it actually reaps significant benefits down the road that makes parenting even easier. Like, if you put in the hard work now, like when they're young, and we don't get too loose, because if we get really loose to our parenting, that's how they become entitled. That's how they become spoiled brats. But if we're very hard on our discipline, then when they get older, man, it just makes parenting a lot easier. And yeah. I think that's just such a big piece that I'm grateful for mentors mentioning that to us with our parenting.
Yeah, that delayed.
I'm going blank on the proverb now, but I think it's like Proverbs 15, but basically disciple your kids early. And then, like in the ESV, the asterisk is basically because you love them.
Yeah.
Because you love them, you will discipline them when they're young.
Yeah. Delayed gratification. I think that's a dying art. And it makes me think about the average listener of this podcast, someone that is in their 20s that probably is new to working. One thing that I've noticed, whether someone's married or they're single, I know some listeners probably do have kids, but I think when you first start working, you're exhausted, you're kind of adjusting to, working 40 hours a week or whatever. So you get home at maybe 5 or so. And I think social media has added to a lot of this, and Netflix and technology, but it's like, time to get home and scroll and all that. And maybe they don't see the immediate consequences because there might not be a spouse, and there might be, but it's easier to find time when it's just one person. And there's likely not a kid either. But I imagine that getting in those habits right now aren't setting you up for success later with children. And another thing that I've noticed, and I wonder if you could maybe speak to this a little bit, it makes me think about community. I think when you are single in your younger years, a lot of times people find themselves in isolation, and maybe you get home from work and then you just are at your apartment and you just kind of make dinner and you sit there, because we've been handed friends through school and sports and activities our whole life. And then all of a sudden you graduate and you don't have that. And I heard a quote once that said that community is built, not found. And I think people recently out of college, sometimes, they don't know where to start. I mean, I think the church is a great place. There's other organizations too, but to the, if you have any advice to the 20-something-year-old about building habits right now, because, when at home first, well, I don't have anyone to take care of at home, so that doesn't apply to me. But what would you say to the person that's like, yeah, I think it does apply to you?
Yeah, fantastic question. There's so much I want to say, and what I will say in the response is not necessarily in the order of priority or preference, but some of the items just coming to my mind is. Isolation is real. Like, not only to the people in the 20s talking, but I'm pretty confident you got listeners in their 30s and 40s. And as I work with clients myself, I see that there's those moments where they just don't have friends. And Hampton, for me, that's a story I unfortunately can relate to a ton, because how we all typically are is we get out of college and we put all our priorities into work. We work hard. And so we kind of don't see a lot of, we may see some friends a little bit in our 20s, but not much. But then guys start dating and then they get married and then you start to see less and less. Well, then they have kids and you start to see, less and less of people. About 7 years ago, I was president of sales for a national contractor. I was talking to my coach, and I just told him I was exhausted come the weekend. Because, like, during the week, I was super employee. I was traveling every week. I was all into the individuals I was with. And on the weekends, it was trying to be super dad, super husband. And as I was talking to my coach, we were joking. He's like, the problem is you have no friends. And, obviously, it kind of hit me off guard. And I had friends to the standpoint I could go grab a beer with somebody or a coffee with somebody. But at the end of the day, my coach was spot on. I didn't have any friends of depth. So what I did is I put together a list of roughly 20 guys, and I went and speed dated. They didn't know I was speed dating. But basically, I went and met with a bunch of these guys, and if we just talk sports and weather and work, I was like, I don't need a lot more of this. I'll see this individual once every 6 months or so. But for the individuals I met with, and we did talk work, sports, and weather, but we also talked God, purpose, marriage, ups, downs, what we're struggling with, hopes, dreams. Like, I want more of that. Like, how do I get more of that? So what I did, Hampton, is I put together, out of that group of people I met with, I put together a group, basically a small group. We meet every Thursday morning. We've been doing it for now 7 years, and every January we take a trip to Florida. And it's a guy's trip, and it is awesome, and I love it. So a few things in there for any listener, no matter what your age is or where you're at, is the normal trajectory that we all have will be no friends. Because we're spending so much time at work. And if you're single, you come home to everything you said. You watch TV, you know every sport event going on, you know all the breaking news, you know all these things. But when you start to have kids or a spouse, then that becomes, where you spend a lot of your time, which is all good. But we lose friends. But a lie I believed, Hampton, is, well, I need to be home with my wife or my kids. I can't be out being I can't have friends. I don't have time for that. Or my wife would not like me to go on a guy trip. That's all a lie, because the devil doesn't want us having community, because lone wolves get taken out. And so if we don't have any friends, the devil wins, we become lonely, and we fill that kind of void through working harder or through bad things we can all do in solitude with phones and, computers. Or bourbon, or whatever the vice may be. And so it's if we have friends. And so what I found out through, learning this process is, by me hanging out with guys, my wife loves it, because I come back with full energy. I've laughed. I've been pushed and challenged. I've been held accountable. And so I come back as a better man. Now, if I was hanging around dirtbags, she's going to be like, stop, find new friends. Or, we were guys that just talk about waitresses or whatever when we're at the place, she wouldn't want any of that. But those aren't the guys I'm hanging with. Same thing with the annual trip that I do with the guys, is she loves that I go on that, because I come back, I've got ideas for our family, I'm charged up, I'm excited. And also, I want her to go on the girl trips, because she's got good girlfriends and they also fill her cup and she's laughing and having a good time. So a lie many people have is, hey, I'll do guys later, and or guy time, or if you're a female listening, then it's hang out with the ladies later. And it's like, no, do it now. When I wrote the book Went Home First, I came across this quote that says, no one ever talks about Jesus' greatest miracle, and his greatest miracle is that he had 3 close friends in his early 30s. And it takes intentionality, no matter what the age is. So go find friends, stay in friends with them, make sure they're good friends, make sure that you got friends of depth. And then the other piece that you made a comment about is, single folks come home and then they just veg the rest of the evening. 2 comments on that. One, in order to be a great spouse, in order to be a great parent, you got to be a great friend. You've got to know how to show up and be empathetic for individuals, have compassion, be kind, have a servant heart. And you don't do that sitting on the couch. So invest in those in your orbit and spend time with them. Become a great friend. And then from there, you can, be a great parent, great spouse. And the other thing, I hired a coach who was talking about some stuff and how we budget money. Like we all talk about budgeting money and, hey, what's the percentage you put towards tithing? What's the percentage you put towards giving and saving and all those pieces? Well, what's crazy about all that money, we can get more of. But yet time, we just kind of piss away, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you thought about how much money you made per hour, whatever that may be, just for easy numbers, call it $100. If you think if you make $100 per hour and you come home at 5 and you sit from 5 to 10 p.m. just sitting on the couch, was that really worth $500? Like just sitting on the couch for $500 just to watch TikTok and Sports Center and Fox or CNN? Like really? Like that was worth it? And I think when we start auditing our time and putting dollars to it, it'll be like, that was not worth it. I'm going to be a better steward of my time. Right? As time, talent, and treasures is what we've been gifted, and it's what we also need to steward. And so, yes, we need to steward our money wisely. We need to steward our talent wisely, but we also need to be stewarding our time wisely, because that we don't get back.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. Why do you think men specifically have a hard time having those deep, real, authentic relationships, that deep community? Like, I feel like that's not super common among men, which is probably why we see people in isolation and then see, marriages get messed up and identity issues and bad fathers and all that stuff.
Awesome question. I think for a couple reasons. One, it has not been modeled well. I was blessed. I have an awesome dad, a great dad. And so that part's super cool. And so I'm grateful for that. So not everyone's had a fantastic dad that could model what that relationship looked like. Many of us have not had a great boss model it. What does conversations look like of work-life balance? What do conversations look like of purpose? And so we've never had a good boss model it. And some of us have never had a mentor / just peer that could model a good friendship well. And asking those questions and difficult questions. So I think one, it's the model. It's never been modeled for us. I think the other reason is, the devil loves a kept secret. Right? Kept secrets, when there's so much power that the devil has over until we share something. And so many men don't want to share their deep, dark secrets because they feel that it's going to be weak. But man, there's strength and vulnerability. So as you share some of the brokenness with someone across a coffee table, you have power over that. You have power over that sin you had, or that weakness, or that insecurity you have. And what's crazy is, as you share it, not only have you conquered it, but the person on the other side of the coffee table, now they start to say, whoa, all right, I'm going to be more vulnerable. I'm going to share some things about, I'm struggling in my marriage over here, or I too have no friends, whatever the case may be. And so I think it's not been modeled, and then people just don't want to cross that line of vulnerability. And I've been around a lot of campfires, probably just like you, and campfires or Bible studies or masterminds or kind of whatever the case may be. And if there's not a level of vulnerability offered up by a leader, then it will stay surface. Like, it will always stay surface, but it takes somebody to start the ball rolling. And so to that listener, if there's no one starting it, that may be you. Like, that may be your call for this next fire pit, coming up on a future Friday night as you're hanging out with the guys, is to start sharing some of that vulnerability.
Yeah, you're right. Vulnerability really does breed vulnerability. I've got a guy, shout out Gavin DeWitt. He works with me at Wild Spark, and we kind of have this thing going where um, just even something small, it's like, hey man, I'm struggling with this today, and I just needed to tell you that. And it's always like, man, thanks for letting me know. And it's so freeing. And normally the other person has like something to say back. And I guess it's, you know, marriage is an easy example. And this is, again, coming from someone that's been married for almost 3 years. But I imagine that people don't get divorced overnight. Like it's probably a snowball of just bad decisions or living in isolation or lack of vulnerability with your spouse or with other people or lack of confession or anything. But like, if you think about if you just make a habit of knowing that like being vulnerable with someone, it like brings you freedom. I feel like there's no snowball that could even be created. It's almost just like a little grain of snow. It's like a little snowflake that can't even build into something bigger if you just confess whatever it is that you might be struggling with. And so that's not something that like I've always been amazing at, but like thankful for the spirit that's always like, hey buddy, you should probably tell your friend about that. Or you should probably tell your wife about that. And it's always worth it every time. And the lie is like the enemy does it. They want you to keep it to yourself. So I think that's definitely a great point that I've noticed a lot of men, including myself, struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, myself as well. I mean, it's just, you know, our pride gets in the way. Our pride gets in the way, or, you know, kind of whatever the case may be. But you mentioned you don't get divorced kind of overnight. No, I mean, it's like 1 degree at a time of a poor choice. You know, a part of my story that I think your listeners, will need to hear, quite honestly, is just because it all started for me in my 20s, which is where a lot of your listeners are, is in my 20s. You know, the big part of my story, that's why a 24-year wedding anniversary is such a huge deal for us, is, in my 20s, I made the comment about I was a civil engineer and I wasn't finding hope or joy out of my job. And for the listeners, is you can't take your identity or your value or your worth to your job. Like it doesn't fulfill it. It never will. And now, even fast forward, I love what I do, and it's thanks to God's provision, having success, but I still can't take my identity to what it is, because all temporary things can be taken away. Your job, you talked about posts you saw the other day. I just actually put a post up that every title we have in our life, CEO, manager, president, can be taken away except for one, and that's parent. Like that title just sticks. I also didn't put in there, but being a beloved son or a beloved daughter of God. But it was a LinkedIn post, so I hit my faithful ones here and there on LinkedIn. But Sure. At the end of the day, it was kind of Father's Day related. But that was the piece. But for me, in my story, is I was taking my identity in my job, and my job was doing its best as can. They were promoting me. I was the person only in my 20s in this leadership program for a 1,000-person company, and so most people were in their 30s and 40s in this kind of next level leader program. I was the only one in my 20s, so it was cool. They were doing what they could, but it still wasn't enough for me, because unfortunately for them, I was taking my identity to work. Well, the next thing I did when that wasn't fulfilling it, I thought, hey, I'm going to take my identity to my spouse, which you can't do either. You can't take it to a girlfriend, to a spouse, to anything, because a broken human can't fulfill the identity in those voids of another broken human. Only God can do that. But at the time, even though I grew up in a Christian home, I didn't kind of know all these kind of ins and outs of like where I was getting tripped up. And so when that didn't work, Hampton, and taking my identity, who I am, to my spouse, I thought, hey, maybe I'll take my identity and my value worth to another woman. That'll be a smart idea. Obviously, stupid idea. And so having an affair, awful, jerk, can't believe I did it, like all those pieces. But to what you made the comment earlier, a divorce doesn't happen overnight. It's 1 degree at a time. Like I didn't have an affair, like boom, like overnight. It was a choice that, like, little different choices I was making 1 degree at a time to drift me apart from my marriage. And I shared this story with an individual, back to campfires. We're talking about campfires. And one guy asked the question, hey, how did your affair start? And I joked like I don't know exactly how it started. However, I bet it probably started something like, I like your shirt. And then the next time when I was going to see that person, I made sure I had a nice shirt on. And it's one of those deals. And then, sharing a story, an emotional story, or making sure that they heard something funny I said so they'd laugh. And so it was like that 1 degree at a time that I was, drifting from my spouse to another woman. Well, I shared that story, Hampton, around a campfire. A week later, I get a phone call from a buddy. It says, dude, you're not going to believe what happened. And I was like, what? Tell me, man. And he said, I was getting a haircut. And, I think the stylist, I think she's, pretty attractive. And she made the comment, hey, I like your new shirt. And he's like, run.
Yeah.
And so he called me and said, listen, I don't know what would have happened. Like, what path I would have went down. Not that he'd have an affair right there, but who knows? Maybe next time he shows up a little bit more interested or curious. Anyways, and so he called to say, man, I'm so glad you made that comment, because my antennas were up. And I was like, hey, well, that's great. Are you getting a new stylist? And he says, yes. I said, good. That's a good move. So it's just one of those deals where, back to the 1 degree, just be careful. I mean, that's why us as men, and I mean women too, but for the majority of your audience being men, that is why we have got to check ourselves out daily. Spending time in the Word, checking our heart, right? As David says, check my everlasting ways. And I check my heart and know my everlasting ways. Like, hey, where am I drifting? Where am I 1 degree off? Whether it's in my marriage, it's in my friendships, it's in my habits. Where is it that's getting me off course? And so, to close up the story on my marriage, I eventually came clean in my affair a few years later. And it was not cupcakes and balloons in the Carlson household. However, we powered through it. We got help. We really did a great job of putting God at the center of our individual lives, but also in our marriage. And today's 24 years of marriage, and so it has a happy ending. I mean, and so I'm grateful for it. But it also took hard work. But what I want the listeners to take away from it is no matter where you're at, either in your single life or in your marriage, it's we can't be taking our identity to temporary things. We cannot at all, because they are not fulfilling. And so just be careful as you climb that corporate ladder. And you're like, oh, I'll be a man, I'll be a stud once I get 6 figures, or once I get 250 or 500,000 or whatever that is, or once I get the vice president, or once I get the corner office. All of those are fleeting. And so I wish I would have known that more.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And feel prompted to say this, whoever's listening to this right now, and that thing came to your mind that you need to tell somebody about because you're 1 degree off. I love you, and I'm not trying to be rude, but do it. I know you'll be glad that you did. Maybe this is me listening to this in a couple of months. I'm like, man, I'm talking to myself right now, but I love the principle of the degrees. You don't go from 0 to 180 overnight. And so if you can ask yourself that question, or even have community, your Thursday morning groups, to speak into your blind spots, to say, hey, it may look like you're a little bit off. It may look like you're spending too much time at work. I think that can go a really long way. And it's even cool to hear how, because you opened up about your story around the campfire, the guy getting his haircut, that impacted him. And I know because you shared this right now, it's like someone listening, that's going to impact them. So I appreciate your availability to share hard things, and praise God for what he did. But now I know you've written a book, and before we wrap up, I definitely want to hear about Win at Home First. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. No, thanks. And so written 2 books. First book I wrote was called Win at Home First. I published it in 2019, and really the the whole premise of why I wrote the book Went Home First is because I lost at home first. And there are things in that book that I learned that helped me get back on track that I want everyone to know. The night I was prompted to come clean of my affair, I kind of heard this audible. Obviously, no one else heard it. It was just me and God. But I was in a room of folks, and when I heard it, first was come clean your affair. And so I had this whole wrestling match with God of, no, I'm not. That's a stupid idea. But eventually, as I'm getting closer to saying, all right, fine, I will come clean, I heard, you need to hand over your story for a greater story. Like, that was this phrase. And I didn't know what that meant. And then fast forward a few years, like, handing over my story is sharing the brokenness of my journey, but also sharing the tools that help me get back up. And so how that's worked in like coaching, and where I even got the title of the book, is as I coach individuals and talk with them, I was hired by this president of a company to coach and work on vision and values for the company. But as we're talking, this is our pretty much, he's already hired me. And so now we're on basically our really first coaching call, and I'm asking questions. How was your weekend? Tell me about the kids. Tell me about your spouse. Kind of just these questions. I could totally tell him and his spouse weren't connected. And I just got an icky feeling. And so I just made this comment of, listen, I know you hired me to help with vision and values for the company. We're going to do it. But as the leader goes, so goes the company. So if things aren't well in your home, then it's going to creep into your work. Like, we can't separate it. I don't know if they ever could have separated, like back in the day when there's, people were working without iPhones, iWatches, and just going to work and coming back at 5. But nowadays, like, we're in communication with our family all day long. We may get in a fight at 7 a.m., but at 9 a.m., we're still getting that text from our girlfriend or our spouse saying, I can't believe you said this, and, kind of fighting back. And so like it's just all integrated in there, more so than it's ever been. And so anyways, with this client, as we're talking, I just was like, hey, you're going to have to win at home first in order for us to have successful vision and values for the company. Is that okay? And he has this long pause, and I literally was like, oh my gosh, I just got fired from the biggest contract at the time I had. And he says, yeah, it's okay. We do. Because every day I drive home, I get a pit in my stomach before I go back through my front door. He goes, yeah, we can do it. And so we did. We started talking home and work. It's not like the whole coaching call is all about home. I mean, majority ends up being about work. But I now have permission to talk about what your quiet time look like. Are you getting to the gym? Are you going on dates with your spouse? Are you intentional with your kids? Do you have friends? And when's the next time you're getting together with a buddy? Like, once you have permission to talk about that, man, crazy growth can happen. And one thing, Hampton, for all your listeners to hear is, when I started coaching, I used to almost get intimidated, like who was on the other side of that Zoom call or coffee table. I'm no longer intimidated at all. And I'm not saying it's not that I don't care. It's just like everyone is broken. Like everyone. So if you're listening, and, as Hampton challenged you a little bit ago to share some of that, brokenness or vulnerability with others, is you're not alone. Like everyone is dealing with some junk. And so once you kind of unpack that and you realize, man, it's no one's got this all figured out. No one, whether they're running a $5 million company or a $5 billion company, people still have their different challenges. So anyways, that's the book, Went Home First. The second book is called Rise and Go. And the whole idea with Rise and Go is, hey, all leaders get knocked down. It's just the great leaders get back up quicker. So what could it look like in your life the next time you got knocked down, you got back up quicker? So Hampton, I would love to give a book away to all of your listeners, and they just have to pay shipping and handling.
Great.
It's CoryMCarlson.com and then /free book. So you just go to that landing page, pick out the book you want, and you'll have a whole form to fill out and do it. Not a whole form. Give me your address, and we'll send you the book.
Hey, I love it. Y'all better take him up on that. Because these books are great. I've got. Unfortunately, I don't have Went Home First behind me on my bookshelf. I should, but it's on my bedside table at home to be read. So maybe next time. But Cory, this is great. I'm probably going to listen back to this several times because I just learned so much from you. This really might have been a bit of a counseling session for me. Like I said, it was going to be at the beginning. But I don't know if I told you this. Sometimes people think it's a little cheesy, but this is how I like to end these episodes, by my guest telling people to wake up and lead. So normally I say it's time for you and me, and then you say to wake up and lead. Can you do that for me?
I can do it.
All right. It's time for you and me
to wake up and lead.
There we go.